Most people chase self-improvement because they believe something is fundamentally wrong with who they are. They run from one method to another, books, routines, gurus, habits, hoping to shape themselves into a version that finally feels worthy. But the truth is far more unsettling. Self-improvement often begins with self-rejection. It subtly teaches you that your authentic nature is inadequate, that your instincts can't be trusted, and that your inner voice is an obstacle instead of a compass. The real danger is not in wanting to grow, but in believing that growth means becoming someone else. When you constantly attempt to fix yourself, you unknowingly split your psyche in two, the part of you that performs improvement and the part of you that is endlessly judged. And the more you chase the ideal version of you, the more distant you become from the real one. Your soul does not want perfection. It wants integration. It wants you to meet the parts of yourself you've avoided, the fear, the desire, the grief, the anger, the forgotten creativity, the old dreams, the unmet needs. The more you silence these parts by covering them with productivity hacks and motivational slogans, the louder their rebellion becomes. Anxiety, exhaustion, emotional numbness. These are not signs of failure, but signals that you've abandoned your true center. The shocking truth is this: you don't transform by adding more to yourself. You transform by unmasking what was buried beneath the noise. Real growth is not about upgrading your personality, it's about returning to the place where your essence was lost. When you finally stop forcing yourself to become better, you begin to understand yourself more deeply. You discover that the core of your being has always been capable, always been worthy, always been enough. Improvement loses its toxicity the moment it emerges from self-acceptance rather than self-hatred. True transformation happens when you stop chasing an image of who you think you should be and start listening to the quiet intelligence of your inner world. When you do, a shift occurs. You stop striving and start unfolding. You stop performing and start being. And in that state of authenticity, the soul awakens, not through effort, but through recognition. Self-improvement becomes toxic when it begins with the belief that the self is flawed or unworthy, because the moment you decide you must fix yourself, you silently declare war on your own existence. You turn your inner world into a battleground where every emotion, impulse, and imperfection becomes an enemy. Instead of growth rising from curiosity and self-awareness, it grows from fear, fear of not being enough, fear of being judged, fear of being left behind. This fear quickly becomes the hidden engine behind every attempt to improve, creating a cycle of striving that never leads to inner peace. You begin to measure your life through comparison, constantly evaluating your worth against impossible ideals, and each day becomes a test you feel obligated to pass. The pursuit of becoming better transforms into the pursuit of becoming acceptable, and the soul cannot thrive in an environment where acceptance is conditional. This toxin spreads subtly. On the surface, self-improvement looks like discipline, ambition, and motivation, but underneath lies a profound rejection of the present self. When you're convinced that who you are today is insufficient, you disconnect from your authentic needs, desires, and emotional truth. You push yourself toward goals that don't align with your inner nature, forcing your spirit into shapes that were never meant for it. This creates a restless tension, a constant feeling of being behind in your own life, as though your current self is merely a temporary version waiting to be replaced. And when improvement comes from self-hatred, no achievement brings relief. The finish line always moves further away, and you become trapped in a cycle of proving your worth rather than expressing it. The more you reject the self, the more you silence the parts of you that actually need attention. Your vulnerability, your fears, your unmet longings, your intuitive wisdom. These parts do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, where they manifest as anxiety, irritability, self-sabotage, or emotional exhaustion. What began as a quest for a better life becomes a slow erosion of your inner harmony. Instead of evolving, you fragment. Instead of growing, you perform. Even the desire to heal can become a mask that hides the deeper wound, the belief that you must earn your right to exist as you are. Growth becomes meaningful only when it springs from self-acceptance. But when it begins from the belief that you are flawed or unworthy, self-improvement transforms into a toxic chase that distances you from the very self you are trying to evolve. Endless pursuit of improvement creates inner division because it forces you to constantly choose between who you are and who you think you should be. When you're always trying to mold yourself into an idealized version, you begin to split your identity into two competing forces: the self that lives in the present moment and the self that is always being criticized, reshaped, and optimized. This division quietly drains your energy. You stop experiencing life directly and begin analyzing every action, every emotion, every thought through the lens of whether it brings you closer to some imagined perfection. Instead of being a companion on your journey, your mind becomes a relentless evaluator, always watching, always scoring, always insisting you are not enough yet. This inner division breeds constant self-judgment. When improvement becomes an obsession, any pause feels like failure, any rest becomes laziness, any imperfection turns into evidence that you're falling behind. You start to believe that your worth rises and falls with your productivity, your discipline, or your achievements. Even moments of joy get invaded by the thought that you should be doing more, becoming more, working harder. The gentle, human parts of you, the parts that need rest, compassion, and understanding, are pushed aside because they don't align with the rigid expectations you've built. You begin to mistrust your own instincts, convincing yourself that your natural rhythms are obstacles instead of guidance. Over time, this self-judgment becomes a habit so automatic that you no longer question it. You simply assume you are always lacking. This constant internal pressure creates disconnection, both from yourself and from life. When you are endlessly trying to improve, you stop noticing the small details that make life meaningful, the warmth in conversations, the simple beauty of quiet moments, the satisfaction of being present. You become disconnected from your emotions because you fear that acknowledging them might slow your progress. You distance yourself from your own authenticity, trading your inner truth for the illusion of constant advancement. And perhaps most tragically, you disconnect from your soul because the soul cannot speak through noise, comparison, and perpetual striving. In this divided state, improvement no longer enriches you, it exhausts you. Instead of growth, you experience fragmentation. Instead of evolution, you experience pressure. And the more you chase the ideal, the further you drift from the wholeness you were seeking all along. The soul seeks integration, not perfection, because its true purpose is not to sculpt you into a flawless image, but to unify the many layers of your inner experience. Perfection demands that you erase, silence, or correct the parts of yourself that seem inconvenient, emotional, chaotic, or wounded. But integration asks you to sit with these parts, listen to them, and allow them to exist without shame. The soul does not measure your worth by how polished you appear. It measures your authenticity by how willing you are to embrace the totality of who you are. Every fear, every desire, every flaw, and every forgotten dream carries a message about your deeper truth. When you suppress these messages in pursuit of perfection, you cut off access to your own inner wisdom. The parts of you that you try to hide do not disappear simply because you deny them. They retreat into the unconscious, where they continue to influence your choices, reactions, and relationships in ways you may not understand. A suppressed emotion might resurface as anxiety, an ignored dream might turn into resentment, a rejected trait might show up in others, triggering you because you refuse to face it within yourself. Integration, unlike perfection, invites these exiled pieces back into awareness. It allows you to see your darkness and your light as essential companions rather than opponents. When you acknowledge these parts, they lose their destructive power and become integrated strengths, guiding you toward self-understanding rather than self-conflict. Perfection creates internal warfare by convincing you that only certain versions of you are acceptable. You begin to censor your thoughts, negotiate your emotions, and judge your impulses. You try to control your humanity instead of understanding it. But the soul cannot thrive under conditions of rejection and control. It expands only when you allow yourself to be whole, messy, curious, uncertain, and evolving. Integration means allowing contradictions to coexist, being strong while feeling vulnerable, being wise while still learning, being confident while holding fear. This coexistence creates psychological harmony, a sense of inner alignment that perfection can never offer. When you stop suppressing what feels inconvenient and start acknowledging it, something profound happens. The soul feels seen. The energy you once used to hide parts of yourself becomes available for creativity, clarity, and inner peace. Integration is not about becoming someone new, it is about finally relating to yourself with honesty. And in that honesty, the soul finds the freedom to breathe and guide you with a deeper sense of purpose. Symptoms like burnout, anxiety, and numbness often signal misalignment with one's true nature, because the psyche has its own way of communicating when you have wandered too far from what is authentic. When your outer life contradicts your inner truth for too long, your mind and body begin sending warnings. Burnout is not simply the result of too much work, it is the result of working against yourself. It appears when you push your energy toward goals that don't resonate with your deeper values, when you perform roles that suffocate your spirit, or when you force yourself to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. Burnout becomes the soul's final attempt to stop you, to slow you down, to make you reconsider the path you're on. It is less a failure and more a signal that you've been living in a way that drains your essence instead of nourishing it. Anxiety often arises from the tension between the life you are living and the life your inner self is calling you toward. It is the internal friction created when your instincts speak, but you ignore them, when your intuition warns you, but you override it, when your emotions ask for attention, but you label them as weaknesses. Anxiety is not always just fear, it is often suppressed truth. It is the discomfort of wearing a mask that no longer fits, the unease of pretending to be someone you're not, the strain of forcing yourself to endure environments, relationships, or ambitions that violate your deeper nature. It is the psyche pulling you back toward alignment, even if the message arrives in the form of distress. Numbness is perhaps the most subtle and dangerous signal of all. When you become numb, it means the inner self has gone quiet because it no longer feels heard. It retreats as a form of self-protection, shutting down emotional responses to prevent further damage. Numbness is not emptiness, it is overflow. It is the result of feeling too much for too long without expression, without validation, without space to breathe. It signals that you have disconnected from your intuitive center, that you have been operating on autopilot, chasing demands rather than listening to your soul's needs. When these symptoms appear, they are not evidence of weakness, but invitations to return to yourself. They remind you that you are not meant to live a life designed by pressure, expectation, or societal conditioning. They call you back to authenticity, offering you a chance to realign your outer world with the truth that lives within you. Real transformation comes from uncovering the authentic self, not constructing a new one, because the essence of who you are has always existed beneath the layers of conditioning, expectations, and emotional defenses. Most people approach transformation as if it requires building a different identity, one that looks stronger, more successful, more confident, more controlled. But this approach leads you further away from your core. Constructing a new self often becomes an exercise in performance, where you wear traits like costumes rather than allowing them to arise naturally. It turns growth into a project rather than a revelation. True change isn't about assembling qualities you think you should have, it's about stripping away everything that hides the truth of who you already are. From childhood onward, you learn to adapt by pleasing others, suppressing parts of yourself, meeting external expectations, and creating survival-based identities. These adaptive selves can become so dominant that you forget they are masks. You may convince yourself that the persona you present to the world is your true identity, but deep down there is always a quiet voice signaling that something feels off. Real transformation begins when you stop trying to redesign yourself and instead start listening to that deeper voice, the one that emerges when the noise of self-improvement fades. This voice doesn't ask you to become more. It asks you to become honest. It urges you to notice what energizes you, what drains you, what you crave, what you fear, what you long for, and what you've abandoned within yourself. Uncovering the authentic self requires courage because it forces you to face the parts of your identity that you buried to fit in or feel safe. It asks you to acknowledge your wounds without letting them define you. It asks you to embrace your emotions instead of correcting them. It asks you to let go of the roles that no longer serve you. This process is not glamorous. It is quiet, tender, and often uncomfortable. But it brings a kind of clarity that constructed identities can never achieve. When you peel back the layers of conditioning, you rediscover the natural strengths, values, and desires that were always present. You begin to act from alignment rather than pressure. You connect with life not through effort, but through authenticity. And that authenticity becomes magnetic. It changes how you speak, how you choose, how you relate, and how you navigate the world. Transformation becomes less about becoming someone new and more about remembering who you were before life taught you to forget. Growth becomes healthy only when rooted in self-acceptance, because transformation that begins with compassion creates space for the psyche to unfold without pressure or self-rejection. When you start from a place of acceptance, you are not trying to force yourself into a new identity, you are allowing your true nature to reveal itself. Self-acceptance doesn't mean you stop evolving. It means you no longer evolve out of fear, shame, or comparison. Instead of trying to correct what you think is wrong with you, you begin to understand yourself with gentleness and curiosity. This shift dissolves the inner resistance that often blocks growth. When you no longer see yourself as a problem to fix, you can explore your inner world without defensiveness. You give yourself permission to move slowly to measures of renewal. This approach aligns your growth with your natural rhythm rather than external expectations, making it sustainable rather than exhausting. Self-acceptance also strengthens your relationship with your inner self. When you treat yourself with kindness, you create a sense of safety that allows deeper layers of your psyche to emerge. Old wounds rise not to overwhelm you but to be acknowledged and integrated. Hidden qualities surface because they finally feel welcomed. You stop battling your emotions and start listening to them. This openness turns growth into an organic unfolding rather than a rigid plan. You begin to evolve because you are ready, not because you feel pressured to change. When growth emerges from acceptance, it becomes authentic. You don't grow to meet an ideal, you grow to meet yourself. Each step forward reflects a deeper alignment with who you truly are. And because the foundation is acceptance, the evolution that follows is steady, grounded, and real. This is the kind of